Hey everybody, IcyCat here. We've seen a lot of changes come to the game so far with all the updates since launch, but one area that hasn't received a lot of attention is Terrorist Hunt. So let's talk a little bit on how they could change things up on that side of the game too. Since launch, the game has received several major updates and patches. Now, most of that is concentrated on the player versus player experience, not as much on Terrorist Hunt, though there's been some changes. Some people are not really into Terrorist Hunt. They're strictly about the player versus player. That's where they want to spend all their time, and that's fine. If that's you, that's completely okay, but this video is probably not going to interest you very much. On the other hand, if you're all about the Terrorist Hunt, then this will probably be a more interesting topic for you. I've actually known some people that they're level 40, they're level 50, and they've never played the standard multiplayer. They've only played with friends cooperatively in Terrorist Hunt, and they've gone through 40 and 50 levels just doing that and that only. So there's definitely people that are fans of this mode. One of the biggest things I think that would mix things up is the addition of a new mode of play. Right now we have 3 attacker modes and 1 defender mode. So one idea for that could be mixing some objectives up, maybe having a bomb defusal and a hostage rescue in the same mode, where instead of having 2 bombs to defuse, you would have 1 bomb to defuse and 1 hostage to rescue and extract. Wouldn't matter which one you did first, you'd have to go back and get the other one, but just sort of having those 2 elements in play at the same time would be sort of neat. Now, I'm aware that there's some different AI behaviors between the 2 modes, but they might be able to switch the behaviors on the fly. I know they have that AI strategy manager application that sort of governs how the AI behaves. And so maybe it could switch between the 2 modes as you fulfill one objective or, something like that. Another idea for a new mode would be something that's objective-based. In some of the older Rainbow Six games, you would have missions that centered around going in and putting a bug on a phone or uploading a virus into a computer. And then once you did that, you could then begin killing the terrorists or something. I think something like that could work well here. And the way you could do it is this. Use what's already in your levels. Every level has a computer or a vehicle or, something like that. And make these kind of objectives that players can interact with. It wouldn't require anything new other than to just make it so that when the player came up to the objective position that was marked, they would just have to press and hold a button to fulfill whatever it was they were supposed to do. Whether it's grabbing the documents out of the briefcase or putting a bug on the car or whatever it might be. It doesn't even have to have any fancy animation to go with it. Just press and hold the button until the meter fills up and then you've completed it. But that would give a player a reason to visit certain parts of the map that they might not otherwise go to. And it could even be interesting to see that get mixed into the game modes that already exist. For instance, something like doing a classic terrorist hunt, but also having an objective to do, or an extract hostage, but also having an objective or 2 to do. It wouldn't work for the defensive missions so much, but I think you could even make it work for bomb defusal, and you could even do it where it's sort of randomly mixed in. You might play 5 missions without having an objective, but then on that 6th mission, you might get an objective saying, hey, go grab the documents out of the briefcase. And then you play 4 more missions without a single objective, and then you get a mission that says, go up and put a bug on the phone. And it sort of could mix things up in an interesting way. One more idea would be to give some new life to the defender mode. Right now there's a lot of attacker modes, but there's nothing really for the defenders to do other than the 1 mode, and I don't get to play as them often enough. One idea is to do sort of a variation on protect hostage and extract hostage. What this would be is, let's take a map like, say, Clubhouse as an example. You would have your 4 waves of enemies just like you do now that you would fend off. However, the difference is that you move the hostage throughout the map. So in Clubhouse, we might start down in the church for the first wave. Then once that wave is clear, we're given, say, 60 seconds to get up to the next objective position, which is, maybe in the bar. You get there, you hold off the next wave. Now, when that wave is cleared, you're given another 60 seconds to get into position in, say, the strip club. That 3rd wave then is cleared, and you're given your final 60 seconds to get outside to an extraction position with a smoke grenade and hold off the final 4th wave at the exterior position. Now, this would be sort of neat because it would bring in a lot of strategy. Do I use my traps and reinforcements now, or do I save them for the next wave? When I'm in the outside wave, I can't make use of certain gadgets if I'm certain operators, so maybe I need to use them now rather than holding onto them for later. It kind of brings this strategy element into play. Now, while we're talking about attacking modes and defending modes, one thing I'd like to put out there is I would love to see it so that we could take any operative from either side on any mission, whether they're attacker or defender. I think that would be a lot of fun. You want to take defenders on what were attacking missions? Go for it. If you want to take attackers on defensive missions, go for it. You should be able to choose any of the operators to go on any mission you want to. Now, some of them are going to be less useful than others, but there's also creative ways to use players you might not think of. For instance, you wouldn't think that taking Castle on a classic terrorist hunt might be that useful, but you could do things like you could put up the armor panel behind yourself so that you didn't get flanked from a certain room. Besides, I just really want to take out an entire CTU and do a mission. All 4 FBI operators on the same mission, or all 4 members of the SAS on the same mission. When they were previewing them before the game came out, they would show all of the operators on the same team working together on a terrorist hunt. And it looks so cool, and it made me want to do that. And then the game came out, and I couldn't. So I hope this is something that we'll be able to open up in the future and just let anybody be taken for any mission, and that would, I think, make things a lot of fun, because I feel like my defensive operators are really underused. One idea I've been thinking a little bit about is removing the automatic shell that occurs when you first launch a map. Well, what do I mean by that? Right now, whenever you start the game, the exterior shell of any building is automatically filled in with wooden barricades on all the doors and windows. There's one exception to that. If you play Protect the Hostage mode, none of the doors and windows are filled in, and you have to actually go around and put the barricades in doors and windows. I kind of like that. And that's how the game used to be before the game was actually launched, back before beta, even when the game was still in alpha, and then when it was in E3 demos last year and some other events, you had to go fill in the shell by yourself. And now they've done this autofill thing where it's always filled, and when you start the game, everything is automatically blocked up. And I understand why they do that for player versus player. For Terrorist Hunt, though, last year they showed in the E3 demo they would rappel up the side of the building. They lined up a shot while they're hanging upside down through the glass window and shot the terrorist in the head using a silencer, and then made a silent entry, and they never had to break a barricade to do it. It was really cool. I'd kind of like to see the return of not having all of that stuff filled in automatically. Being able to kill some of the enemies from the exterior before you go inside is kind of neat, and I like the idea of that. You could even use the siege generator, which is sort of like the internal application which decides which random elements get put into play at which times, to determine whether or not a level would be autofilled, so that way maybe some terrorist hunt missions they would be, and then maybe some they wouldn't be. And that could add some sort of neat dynamics as you come into the buildings using different techniques, whether you clear it from the outside or from the inside, and different ways to go about that. One thing I think that's a little bit silly right now is the use of the room of traps. And you know what I mean by that. That's when you come into a room and there's 20 blocks of C4, or there's 20 piles of barbed wire, and it's just like, okay, really? Obviously, you know what they're trying to do there. They're trying to create different bottlenecks to force the player to go through different routes. I understand what they're trying to do, but I think a more effective way to do that is something they're already doing in the game in situations. If you play the first situation, and it happens in a few of the other situations as well, you'll notice that they strategically place these junk pile barricades made of furniture or debris and cause the player to have to sort of move around the level in a different way than they were moving through it otherwise. I think this would be sort of a neat thing to use instead of the room of traps. If you want to force the player to take a different route, what about having some of these pre-placed barricades where, as a level designer, you could say, okay, here's 6 positions in the map or 8 positions in the map where a junk pile could appear. And then when the siege generator populates the level, they can randomly choose to have one or more of these junk piles sort of turned on to sort of redirect the player. That way these things aren't just, easily cleared with an EMP grenade or something like that, and they sort of serve more of their purpose, but they also kind of make sense. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm annoyed by the room of 20 piles of barbed wire. They irritate me. Same thing with the block of C4. Many people have even said, please fix this glitch. And then the devs have actually responded, on the forums or on the Reddit, it's not a glitch. But it looks like a glitch. 20 blocks of C4 looks like a glitch. Whereas something like this would sort of be more intentional, and I think would fill the role in a more interesting way. Plus, it couldn't be circumvented. You don't just clear it. So it would really force you to move. Just allow the siege generator program to decide whether or not one of these piles are even going to be in the map, or if there is going to be 1 enabled or 2 enabled, where they're going to be, just randomly selecting from some predetermined positions. Now, I want to be clear, this would only apply to Terrorist Hunt. This would not apply to player versus player, only to Terrorist Hunt, and they could program it so it only happened sometimes, not so it was every time you played a map, but it would make some interesting variety and create some of these bottlenecks they were trying to do in a more realistic way. Now, while we're on the topic of traps, I think it would also be kind of cool to have the AI engineers use other traps than what they have. They can put out the nitrocells, they can put out the barbed wire, but I kind of wish they could do some other things too, like maybe something like the gas grenades that Smoke uses would be neat. or the laser trip mines that Capcan has. Running into a few of those would be cool. Again, you don't want to run into a room of 20 of those things, but just being able to put out, one or two here or there, because there's the ones that are predetermined in a room full of them, or there's the ones that the AI engineers will actually deploy as they go around the map. And that's what I'm talking about, that those would be deployed as they go around the map, one here, one there, and give you some other things to look out for. One thing that sort of bothers me sometimes is that there's some attachments that are clearly more useful in Terrorist Hunt than they are in player versus player. Some people do use silencers and lasers in full player versus player mode, and they like them, and that's completely fine. But a lot of people don't. They won't use silencers because it reduces the damage, and they don't want that. Plus, you can hear them even though they're shooting, it's just from not as far away. They did recently implement the thing that the bullet trails on silenced weapons are a little less now for PvP, which is cool, but it's still something that's arguably more useful in Terrorist Hunt than it is in player versus player. Laser sights is another one of these examples. Using it in Terrorist Hunt is just sort of a no-brainer, and using it in player versus player, you give away your position, and so that's sort of something you don't want. What I don't want to do is go through 20 or 22 operators and take off my silencers and my lasers when I want to play some multiplayer, and then put them back on for 20 or 22 operators when I want to play the Terrorist Hunt. So having a loadout that applies to Terrorist Hunt and a separate loadout that applies to the player versus player might be a good way to bridge that gap. One thing I've always felt that this mode needed, though, was more enemies on the outside of the map. When you play the single-player situations, you run into a few examples of this, and it works really well. When you first do IQ's mission, No Intel, you'll run into a guy or two that's standing, I think one's on top of the roof and another one's on top of a balcony. When you do Glaz's Cold Zero mission, there's 3 or 4 guys that are standing on top of the roof and 1 or 2 guys that are patrolling the parking lot. Those kinds of elements are far more interesting when they happen, and I'd like to see more of that in Terrorist Hunt. I do like that in the extract hostage mode, when you try to run the hostage out, that there's a few guys out there. I'd like to see more, and it seems like they're always in the same spot, which is a little too predictable. I really want to see enemies on top of the roof, on top of balconies, down in the parking lot, by the cars. You'll see a little bit of it in some situations, and it's just way too few and far between. There really needs to be more enemies outside. They've done a great job with the level design of making this exterior area. It's detailed. There's lots of good things that you can hide behind and get cover from, and it's just, to not be using that space, I think, is such a waste. And in the single-player situations when they do it, it's interesting. Unfortunately, they also always appear in the exact same spot every time you play it. So, you want to see that with a little bit of randomization, but I only ever run into 1 or 2 guys outside, and the outside is never dangerous. One thing that's always kind of frustrated me is that they balance the Terrorist Hunt experience for difficulty on a 5-man squad, so that if you were playing with 5 people, this was the experience you would get. The thing is, when you play with less than 5 people, you're getting a harder experience. If you're playing with 2 people, you're getting an experience that's significantly harder than 5 people. If you're playing Lone Wolf, the game isn't any easier. You're playing a game that's 5 times harder than intended. And I'd like to see a little bit of difficulty scaling come into that. For every person down on your team, the experience would scale a little bit. Most co-op multiplayer games will do this. If you have more players in your party, the experience is harder. So in Siege, the experience has already been predetermined to be balanced for 5 people. So what we would then do is actually make the experience a little easier, depending on how many fewer people you had. And you could do that in a few ways. I think maybe having an accuracy modifier might be the easiest way to do it, but also tinkering a little bit with the density or the reaction speed and timing of how fast they react might be another way to do it too. So you could program a formula that basically says for every person down from 5, every man down a squad is, make like a 2% accuracy modifier for the AI and a 1/10 of a second reaction time modifier. So if you're down 3 people, then there's a 6% accuracy modifier applied to the AI and 0.3 of a second reaction time penalty on the AI. These kinds of things could help balance it out a little bit. And I'm just using arbitrary numbers here, by the way. I mean, you'd have to play test it and see, okay, that's a little too easy or that's a little too hard or whatever. But just to make the experience a little bit more balanced for the person that decides to play just by themselves or only has one friend that's available to hop online with them and do some Terrorist Hunt. Instead of getting that experience that's like just right for 5 people, but really, really hard for 1 person or 2 people, it'd be nice to see that taken into a little bit of consideration. In the Protect Hostage mode, I've always enjoyed seeing the shield terrorist. and you don't see them in any of the other 3 modes. That would be one that would be sort of neat to see come across as some of the other ones. They're tough. They're pretty tricky, and I enjoy playing against them, but they'd be sort of cool to run into in some of the other scenarios as well. Now, this last update allowed the ability to split your attacker spawns when you were playing ranked mode. I'd like to see this come across to the terrorist hunt as well. A good example of this might be where if you have somebody that likes long-range support, maybe they use Glaz, or somebody with a marksman rifle, they've got a spot on the outside that they like to get into and shoot through some windows. That person can pick the spawn point closest to that and do that, while the rest of the team picks a different spawn point on the other side and kind of enters from that way. You can already do this in ranked player versus player. I just kind of like to see this come across to terrorist hunt as well. It'd just be sort of neat because certain players are going to be able to make better use of different starting positions more so than others. Now, on the defensive waves, you're going to have to all kind of reach a consensus or vote by majority or whatever, and that's fine. But for the attacker spawns anyway, it'd be nice to kind of pick your own starting spot. Another thing that's always kind of rubbed me wrong about Terrorist Hunt is that they all look the same. The only unique terrorist is the bomber. All the other ones are dressed head to toe in black and white. They've got the white face masks, and they've got the charcoal gray or black rain slickers. I wouldn't mind seeing some skins for the terrorists. This could function somewhat similar to unlocking a new DLC operator where you could get it with a large chunk of renown or maybe some rainbow credits if you didn't have the renown to put toward it, but you would unlock essentially a pack of 3 or 4 skin textures that would apply to the terrorist. So then maybe, you could have a skin pack that was like street thugs. They'd be wearing jeans and hoodies or t-shirts or things like that. Now, I kind of get that the thing with the masks is that they obscure the identity of the terrorist. You're not picking on any one nationality or ethnicity of people. You're not saying like the Russians are the bad guys or the North Koreans are the bad. You're not picking on any one group of people. And I get that. I respect that. But you can still kind of maintain anonymity by doing other things. You could put sunglasses on them, or you could say that, okay, there's 3 or 4 character models. One is a person with light skin, another is a person with dark skin, another is a person with another skin shade yet, so that there's sort of like mixed ethnicity, mixed nationality. If you have 3 or 4 models, each one is a little different. And that way you're not getting into that thing where it's like, oh, the bad guys are all this certain race or this certain ethnicity. And you could have this done a few different ways. You could have like maybe a skin pack that's street thugs. And then another skin pack would be guys in suits and ties with sunglasses and the earpieces like private security contractors or something. Another one could put all of the terrorists in biohazard suits. The regular terrorists would be in the yellow suits and the bombers would still be in the white ones. And you could do a bunch of these AI texture packs and have a bunch of varieties of them. I think this would just be a really interesting way to add some variation to the game. You could further vary it by allowing the siege generator, like say, maybe they have 4 or 5 of these skin packs that wind up coming out over time. The siege generator, when it picks the map and the mode and randomly puts the traps around the map and things like that, which skin pack is being used could also be plugged into that. So one round you're facing the guys in the biohazard suits, and the next round you're facing them with the suit and ties. And, maybe in the matchmaking preferences, you can sort of enable or disable various ones if you do want to see them or don't want to see them. But that would be sort of an interesting way to kind of mix up like who you're fighting against and make it feel a little different. Now, just because I'm putting together a list of things I'd like to see change in Terrorist Hunt doesn't mean I'm unhappy with the mode. I think it's a great mode. I love Terrorist Hunt. It's so fun. I love all the ways that the different modes and maps combine together and how the enemies are always in different places. It's just, I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. This is just a collection of ideas that I kind of thought about that might make things a little bit more fresh, more interesting, keep the replay value high. So by no means is this a knock saying that, this mode isn't good enough and it's awful and they need to do better. No, it's really solid. And these are just some things to, increase the lifespan of the mode. What ideas do you guys have? Let me know in the comments down below or share with me on Facebook or Twitter. Next week, if you have a chance to check it out, I'll be doing a live interview with AimAssistGaming.com. They do a weekly Siege podcast. Make sure to check out their website for more information on times and availability. They also keep an archive of their older shows so you can keep up to date on anything they've already talked about. So if you can, just listen in live next Tuesday night or check it out once they've posted the recording online. Now, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to stay up to date on all the latest with Rainbow Six Siege. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.